You said I guess we get started.
Oh, he's getting up there, man. Yo, my mom tried to pick him up and she was like, no. Dude has a lot of energy.
All right, we'll try that again. So, hello everybody, thank you for coming. This is our political education classes here at the community spot, also adorably known as the spot. I'm one of the facilitators. My name is Paul Alexander with Pillars of the Community. This is Michael Odom, another one of the facilitators, and we just like to invite people in to have kind of conversations around this general idea of what political education means. We don't have any particular ideology or anything that we push here other than shit is complex. So we had the opportunity to invite, I know he's been a friend of Michael's for a while, and many of you know him, Brother Maurice Moe Mitchell, to come in and kind of break down some of the work that he's been doing. And I've met the brother a number of times, but then when I started mentioning him to other people and they started breaking down all the stuff he did, I said, oh man, this dude is dope. We need to figure out a way to get him to come in and speak.
Because 3 years of Michael saying stuff, you know.
Well, you know, when Michael says it, it's like, man, you know, Michael, like, dope, he's dope.
Mike said a wolf.
Yeah. But, so anyway, without any further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce Brother Maurice.
Man, it's a real honor to be here. I've come here a number of times on the other side of things just to sort of acknowledge and to just build a community. I live in San Diego, but I spend most of my time on the road. So lately, with the job, and I'm with my job at the Working Families Party, I spend a lot of my time on the road. So it feels really good to be in San Diego and to be in community and to be sharing some of this work. So let's see, where do I want to begin? So I have a presentation that I prepared for another audience, and I'm going to share some of that, which kind of talks about sort of the electoral system that we've inherited over years, and talks about some of the challenges around our electoral system and how we might change it. Then I thought we might talk about this past election that took place a few weeks ago, and talk about we could all have a conversation about what this election meant for folks and some of my takeaways. And then we just kind of open the floor and have an open conversation around electoral politics and political power. And how's that sound? Sound good? All right, great. So let me just tell you a little bit about myself, just to frame kind of who I am, and this thing's flashing, so if it flashes a lot and it seems like a distraction, I'll just cut it off.
Is that from the screen?
My computer isn't flashing, so.
Yeah, that was good before. It might have to do with the way in which the dongle.
You think it's a power? No.
No, it's the dongle. It has to do with
The dongle.
the software.
Okay.
Pretend like it's a raid.
Okay. We'll just work with it, and if it distracts us too much, we'll just cut it off. So again, my name is Maurice Mitchell. I'm the new national director of the Working Families Party. The Working Families Party is a political party that has activists all around the country and has a presence in more than 24 states. It has an actual ballot line where people can actually vote on the Working Families Party line in New York, Connecticut, South Carolina, and Oregon. And we're spreading to be a 50-state phenomenon. And the Working Families Party is a political party for working people in the same way that the major parties are accountable to their donors and to organized capital. The Working Families Party attempts to be accountable to regular folk. and accountable to the issues of everyday people. Before I did work with the party, my orientation and my training is in grassroots organizing. And so I've done a bunch of organizing in New York State, where I'm from, and then over almost 5 years, I've done a lot of work helping to birth the movement for Black Lives, or as many people understand it, the Black Lives Matter movement around the country. Starting in St. Louis after the Ferguson uprising, and then working in communities around the country during uprisings and during moments of crisis in Black communities, trying to build a network of folks who were interested in building independent Black political power. And I deeply believe in building independent Black political power, and in doing that, coming up against some of the contradictions, I've shifted to this place where I recognize that we need to engage in protest, and we also need to engage in thinking about a governance strategy, and we need to do both. And so my work in the party is an attempt to kind of align the social movements and the protest movements that I've helped organize, and the protest movements that I value, with a governance strategy, which is challenging, but I think one of the only paths towards getting out of what I think is a existential moment for our country, right? Okay, so I want to just talk a little bit about social movements a bit. So like when I say social movements, you know, I'm talking about movements like the civil rights movements and the women's rights movements and other movements that that actually shift our culture's understanding of fundamental things within the DNA of our society. And there's two things, when social movements are successful, there's two things I think they do well. I think they render the invisible visible, meaning they help us see anew contradictions that have always existed in our society that have just been baked into our society. So, you know, the social movements that uprooted and ended slavery. Slavery was just a fact of society in this country, and the social movements exposed it and exposed that contradiction and forced us to challenge it. And the social movements recently that had us look anew at police violence against Black people. State violence against Black people is as old as this country, but those social movements were helpful in exposing them and forcing us to deal with them. So they render the invisible visible, and they also render the impossible possible, meaning that you know you're part of a social movement when people who generally might see themselves as subjects are shifting and seeing themselves as agents of change. And they're getting involved, and they're doing things that otherwise they think would be impossible. And they're challenging cynicism, and they're engaging in trying to change structures in our society in really fundamental ways. And so social movements do that really well, but the thing is, social movements, they pose questions, and they expose contradictions. Those questions need to be answered, those contradictions need to be resolved. And generally, the forces in society that are best designed to resolve contradictions and to answer questions are the most organized forces. And we live under capitalism, under neoliberal capitalism. The forces in our society that tend to be the most organized and tend to have the most capacity are organized capital. And so one example I'll use in recent memory, so when the contradiction and the questions around state violence against Black people reached a fever pitch, a solution emerged almost instantaneously. You know, Phaser International, the corporation, had body cameras and offered those body cameras for free to police departments all over the country, and then sold as a product the technology to store the information for the body cameras, right? And so that's the way that organized capital is able to quickly marshal its capacities in order to answer questions and attempt to resolve contradictions that are posed by social movements and left social movements. And in general, nature doesn't like vacuums, and nature doesn't like power vacuums. So whenever social movements create crises of power, those vacuums get filled, and oftentimes we aren't in the position to fill those vacuums. And so part of wrestling with this question around electoral power is trying to wrestle with this question around, could we create enough power so we could go pose the questions and answer them, to expose contradictions and help resolve them. A quick question. How many people fundamentally think that the political system is rigged, or like rigged against working people? It's like the majority of folks, right? Okay. The other, and we're gonna dig into that and dig into like why that's the case. I agree with you. How many people feel that voting is, don't answer, it'll be like an either or thing. Either you're on the side of voting is one tool in our toolbox that could be useful for working people. That's one side of it. Or how many people feel that voting is basically an ineffective way for working people to be able to demonstrate their power, but it probably does more to make the system feel like it's like operating in some sort of like real way. So we'll start with the first thing, which is like it's a tool that could be useful. Show of hands.
So,
Yeah. Okay.
That's a hard one because,
Yeah.
yeah, because, so, that's a hard one though, because when we vote, we know the system's rigged.
Yeah.
We know that nationally, it's so funny, because black people always will say, the feds are gonna come and save us, the feds are gonna do that, but really in voting, that's the worst thing for us.
Right.
Because we have no power when it comes to the federal system, and it's tyranny of the majority, and then there's also broken voting systems and disenfranchisement.
Yeah.
On a local level though,
Yeah.
that's where we wanna seize the power, and that's what we're most concerned with.
Yeah.
So that's where the tool, and we're still at risk of doing that, it's still
Yeah.
problematic.
Yeah.
But that's where I can say, yes, it's a tool.
Yes.
But if I'm voting for Trump or Clinton,
Yeah.
it's not a tool, I'm just making them think that I'm part of the system that we all know is BS.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna say about that.
So you got it. You took my. So basically, what I would have said is like both are true, right? But in different ways. But yeah, go ahead.
It really reminds me of The Matrix when they go to see the Merovingian, and he says, choice is an illusion between those with power and those without.
Yes.
You know, your choices are just an illusion.
Yeah. So well, this is.
What did you say, what did you say that again?
Choice is an illusion created between those with power and those without.
Well, one of the things. This is great. So could we just continue to like people just feel like I like when things are participatory. So just interrupt. We'll facilitate it. It'll work out well. But under neoliberal capitalism, choice is actually a really important feature of neoliberal capitalism because it creates this illusion of democracy. Democracy isn't choice, right? And like we have 12 different types of milk that we could buy, and that is presented as a form of freedom, right? Democracy actually is not just voting, but often there's an attempt to narrow democracy to this thing that you do once a year. You show up and you vote. Right? Democracy is actually, this is democracy. This is a part of democracy. Informing yourself, engaging on a local level, building community. All of this is a part of democracy. It isn't helpful for folks who want to maintain a caste system to have a more broad definition of democracy. It's actually helpful to just be like, just show up once a year, pull that lever, and then go home, right? And so political parties actual political parties, and especially political parties outside of the U.S., actually engage in real democracy 24/7, 365. It's not just about voting. But again, you're absolutely right. Voting is both and. It both can be a useful tool, and it can, if we don't have the right context, delude us into thinking that we have power that we're not actually wielding, you know. And so it's really important that we have the right context.
Yeah, because, I mean, I had a friend saying, what if we all chose, what if we all chose to not vote, And I was like, but there was a period where they didn't let us vote. He's like, but this time though, we'll choose to do it. And that will convince them to do what we want because we chose this time. And it just seemed to me that that was the bad way to use the idea of self-determination. And because at the end of the day, it's not, his argument still wasn't self-determination, it still was just withholding so that people would see your value, but it's people who don't really have your value in mind. So I mean, if you said everybody who don't participate in it and then you make the system collapse, that's one thing. But if there is going to be participation, how do we, imagine the participation and what's good participation, what's bad participation? Because you talked about the idea of choice. Choice in the last 50 years has been, like you said, the illusion, because they want us to think that the electoral process is about individual choice, as opposed, which is individual freedom, as opposed to sort of collective freedom. Because I noticed even when people talk about self-determination, you ask people to define self-determination, and they think it's the term sounds so much about me individually, they don't realize that the term is about a collective.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and that's the definition of bourgeois democracy, right? It's I, as an individual, did this thing. I showed up.
Classical liberal.
Yeah.
Which is hard for people to understand because liberal as a social movement term is different than liberal as a political economic term.
That's right. That's right.
But that's,
So a few other things. The two-party system that.
Oh gosh, pig cats.
I was just gonna say, where did that come from?
What are you saying?
Pig cats.
Oh yeah, the big hats. This slide was I didn't read the staff put this thing together. I didn't realize the pink hats. But this slide is well, we should talk about the pink hats though.
The march of the neoliberals.
This slide demonstrates all the people that. There was a lot of people in 2016 because of the election of Trump that woke up. It's the election of Trump exposed contradictions that for millions of Americans, especially middle class and white Americans, and many of the people here, exposed contradictions where when they woke up the day after, they were like, what country do I live in, right? And these are contradictions that people on the margins of our society have been wrestling with since they've been in America. And what's been fascinating about this is that the Trump election exposes this crisis of democracy that has been, that is nothing new, but has been escalating over several decades. So one of the things I want to share with you around this question of does voting matter, do we live in a real democracy, whatever, is there is a reason why folks on the ultra-right, folks like the Koch brothers and other sort of anarcho-capitalists spend so much money in voter suppression, right? Yeah. So what's not true is that voting and the ability of working people to be able to vote and organize their votes doesn't matter. And the reason why, one indicator is the fact that folks in organized capital spend a significant amount of money to suppress the power of people's vote. So if it didn't matter, they would not be investing in those strategies, right? So a factual inaccuracy to simply say it doesn't matter. It's much more nuanced than that. What we're actually experiencing and why I feel like we're in a crisis of democracy that is pretty urgent is, you know, there's some research I'll share with you, but there's all types of historical information around this particular sort of anarcho-capitalist or sort of libertarian sort of movement of these very, very wealthy people. It started in the late 70s, where they said, if you look at the Constitution, they have all these provisions for minority rights, and it's not for us, it's for the minority of basically landed white men. Those provisions are attempted to sort of balance the democracy within the Constitution. So in order to maintain minority control. And those provisions have been expanded upon by folks like the Koch brothers and others, where they read the Constitution, and what their basic premise is that I should be able to do whatever I want to do with my money. If I'm a billionaire, I should be able to use those billions of dollars any way that I want. And it's a form of tyranny. It's a form of tyranny if the state attempts to somehow constrain my power to control my billions of dollars, right? And so when they talk about tyranny and they talk about freedom, they talk about liberty, they use those words, but that's what they're talking about. They're talking about a small number of billionaires, multimillionaires, and corporations, their ability to extend their political will on society unabated by the state. And what they're seeking to do, starting in the late 70s, early 80s, what they sought to do, and they have billions of dollars, so they're able to invest a lot of resources in this, create organizations, create institutions, and they also have a long game. They're playing chess, not checkers with it. So they understood this would take decades. The ultimate goal is a constitutional convention where they could lock in their power.
Yes.
And at that point, it would be pretty accurate to say that our vote actually doesn't really matter. Which is
They're
why
almost there.
yeah, they're at step 4 or 5, right? So just to, like, how many people followed or were aware of the Kavanaugh hearings, Supreme Court, right? So that's not in isolation. That's actually part of that play, right? So one of the things that they've done pretty effectively and they've invested in is transforming the face of the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, because those appointments are lifetime appointments. Once you appoint somebody to the federal judiciary, unless they decide to leave or they die, they're dead.
Or the ribs get broken.
What was that?
Or the ribs get broken.
Oh yeah. Or the ribs randomly get broken, right? They're there, and one of the plays that they're making is if they could sew up the federal judiciary, then let's say even if we organize and we flip legislatures, we flip the Congress, we get supermajorities, already the Democrats are like leftist supermajorities in Congress, our legislation could be repealed by a right-wing federal judiciary. And it's not just like, and I also want to be clear when I say right-wing, ideologically, it would be like if, it would be this, they have like organizations like the Federalist Society, right? And if we had a similar thing, it would be like when Michael went to undergrad, somebody tapped him and was like, hey, we'll pay for a law school. You just have to act like a safe liberal all throughout law school, all throughout your career, and then get into the federal judiciary, and then you can out yourself as a leftist black radical, and there's nothing anybody can do. That's basically
Step by the door backwards.
yeah. I mean, that's basically how they work.
Yeah.
They tap people very early, and they're like, all right, you know, work for this law firm, do this work here, we'll line you up, like act as,
On paper.
act as legit as possible so that you could get into the federal judiciary and then do ideological warfare for us, right? Which is like the whole purpose of Brett Kavanaugh, right? So, and the challenge is that that's the right wing and that's their play. It's long term, it's visionary. They're focused on systems change. They're revolutionaries. They want to totally uproot systems. And they have captured the Republican Party, right? So there isn't parity. The Democratic Party is captured also, but not by the left wing or by leftists. It's captured by sort of a center-right neoliberal corporate sort of like cabal of folks, right? And so what you have is two parties. One is like a center-right neoliberal party. The other is a party that's captured by the ultra-right. They're big tents. There's a lot of people under the tents, but the people who actually run the parties, people who run the Democratic Party, are informed by the Democratic Party's donor class, and I could get into that. So that's what we're up against. That's why there's a crisis of democracy, because those folks are on step 4 or 5. 5 is a constitutional convention where they lock in their power and totally unruly hours. And the reason why I'm organizing around the Working Families Party is I think there's some things that we could do as working people around this country in order to create an intervention to prevent step 5 and also to reverse the work that they've done over several decades. Let's see, what do I want to, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. Okay, so a little bit about the parties. So we currently have two parties in the US, right? We have a 2-party system. There's other countries that have a 2-party system, but not in the same way. There's many countries that have 2-party systems where, like, technically it's a multi-party. There's spaces where it could be, it could be multi-party, but in actuality, there's just 2 main parties. When people say 2-party system, that's generally what they're talking about. There's like 2 main parties. Like in the UK, it's a multi-party system on paper. It's a multi-party parliamentary system on paper, and there are a few parties. But really, there's 2 parties. There's the Labour Party and the Tory Party, the Conservative Party. Those are the 2 parties, right? In the US, we have a 2-party system, but it's actually a different thing. This 2-party system is like a cartel, right? Where the 2 parties have conspired to get, it's like Coke and Pepsi, right? Where Coke and Pepsi is like, it's not a monopoly, it's a duopoly, right? And there's difference, right? There is, like, if you drink Coke, it's a different flavor than Pepsi. Some people prefer Coke, some people prefer, yeah. So they are different, but there's Coke and Pepsi actually, in some ways, conspire, like, there's value in the rivalry, right? And so duopolies, it's kind of like, Batman and the Joker, like they kind of need each other to exist, right? That's the nature of duopolies. They compete, and then they conspire together to prevent any other further competition.
And call it bipartisan.
Right? And so, like in the market, that's how duopolies operate. They both compete and at times conspire together to suppress competition. Right. And so, and you might say like, oh, well, there's RC Cola but they make up like, 7% of the market share. It's really, we're talking about two parties. So the 2-party system, I mean, basically what happened is at some point in the 18th, there was a more volatile party environment. There was like the Populist Party. This guy's William Jennings Bryan. And like the Populist Party actually like challenged the two parties to the point where both the Republicans and Democrats were like, we actually need to figure out how this can't happen anymore. And they invested in election law. And most of the election law that we have in our various states are designed to suppress third-party opinions and third-party formations, right? And like, if you actually decide like, oh, I'm gonna start a third party, and you look at the laws, you realize like, oh, so I gotta fill out a petition and get 10,000 people to do this, and I need to get a lawyer to certify. All of those things, they aren't designed for any other reason other than to make it hard to participate as a party. Yep.
But also, I don't know, maybe you're gonna talk about, but, you know, the Populist Party and the Fusionist movement was brought by racial violence.
Yeah.
As well, right? Like in a race thing.
Yep.
And because if you go to the archive of the News and Observer newspaper, 1898, Wilmington, North Carolina, you find that both, you know, it's the Democrats that ran the most racist ads, but eventually the Republicans started. Now the Republicans responded, well, no, it wasn't us that was letting black people run amok, it was y'all. So now the whole debate between both parties was who actually was letting black people run amok and commit sexual violence and stuff like that. All in an effort to stop the Fusionist Populist Party, which was about union between the white working class and the black working class.
That's right. That's right. And so that was actually like the last real movement that had a lot of capacity that attempted to create a multiracial, populist, working class sort of alliance. And it was taken down because clearly that would be problematic for the owning class, right? And so, so since then, we've had these two parties, and they're baked into our system of law. So they already have an advantage because they just exist, whereas other people attempt to like engage in third-party formations, have to do all this work in order to show up, have to file all of these legal defenses in order to be real. And if you try to do that on a national level, the only way you can do it is if you have like almost like endless amounts of money. So like the Reform Party with Ross Perot, I don't know how many people remember that, but that guy, he was a billionaire. So he was like, all right, I can start my own party. And he was able to actually engage on that level because, yeah, I could just pay for reams of lawyers. I can make sure that, you know, like ballot access in every state. You know, it's almost impossible unless you're a billionaire to actually compete with the two parties in that fashion. And then we know the Green Party attempts to compete, but actually isn't very successful in winning elections because it's really hard to compete head-to-head with these parties. And they're actually, when we say the system is rigged, this is one of the ways that the system is rigged. The two parties are baked in, and all other competition is given like a short lease to actually operate. So I also want to touch on a few things. So since we have two parties, we also have winner takes all elections, right? So basically what that means is whoever has the most votes wins the whole thing, right? Not even a majority of the votes, just the most, right? And so what that sets up, let's just say if that person just won, that person got like 50.1% of the vote, right? Then that means 49.9% of the people didn't vote for that person, right? It's a lot of people who probably feel totally disenfranchised because the outcome is somebody who has the complete opposite political opinions is now the person who governs the geography that I live in, right? And so when you add the two-party system with winner takes all elections, you create an environment that will always mean that almost half of the population feels very unsatisfied with the outcome of an election, right? And because the two parties are so polarized in so many ways, we're getting to more and more extreme outcomes. So like the difference between Stacey Abrams and Kemp in Georgia, those are very extreme worldviews. And you have this binary choice between one or the other. And all of Georgia has to live with that choice, right? There's other forms of voting. There's ranked choice voting, there's ranked choice with multi-party districts, there's proportional voting, and that style of voting will allow an outcome where you don't necessarily need to feel like any of your vote doesn't matter, or that you're wasting a vote, or that you're spoiling. You can vote for your first choice, you can vote for the choice that you feel is like okay, and the choice that you can live with, right? And that creates all different types of outcomes. And when you match that with like a multi-member district, then let's just say if instead of just voting for one person, you voted for 3 people, the outcome would be 3 people, and so if like 2/3 of the city that you lived in was really, really left, and 1/3 was like a little centrist, then the outcome of the election might be 2 leftists and 1 centrist, instead of an outcome that nobody feels satisfied with, right? So even the system that even the system, and I don't know if I lost everybody with that because there's lots of, but even the system of voting creates a feeling of dissatisfaction from a lot of people, right? And so it creates a tribal sort of environment, and when you racialize that tribalism, you get some of the racial violence that took place right before the election, where white supremacists massacred 2 black folks at the Kroger's in Kentucky, and when the white supremacists massacred the folks in the synagogue. What was that? And yeah, when the white supremacists massacred folks in Charlottesville and killed Heather Heyer, and this is actually like a byproduct of our political culture, which is very, very tribal, very winner takes all, and then the all part that the winners are taking is very valuable. So it also incentivizes corporations to decide like which team they want to be on. Are they going to be on the red team or the blue team? Or are they going to hedge their bets and be on both teams, right? So when you look at the donor class of the Republicans and Democrats, so I'm going to ask a question. How many people feel like the Republicans and the Democrats are different? Raise your hand.
Ish. I like the ish.
How many people think? No. This is
Many different ideologies, but essentially
It's all the same.
they're doing the same thing. I mean, they're fighting for the same.
okay. So this is what I'll say. Like people say that they're different and people say that they're the same are both correct. They agree on really important things. So they basically have an agreement, a consensus around U.S. foreign policy that is pretty consistent.
Right, immigration. We agree on the same thing.
They have a consensus around the economic system that is basically the same. They have a consensus around free trade that is basically the same, right? And those 3 things that I talked about are really, really, really big, huge. So when people are like they're the same, that's what we're talking about. These really big things that whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're gonna be in line. Like it's not like one group is voting for a total different economic system and the other group is, or one group is voting, you're voting for a total different foreign policy or a total different trade policy. The ways that they're different they are different though, and the ways that they're different are worth noting. And so you have to get to, like I said before, you have to get to majority, right? You have to get to 50% plus 1 in order to win an election, right? And so who the electoral coalitions are, that's very different. Basically, you could almost look at the 2 parties as being a set of elites who have unpopular worldviews and need to get a bunch of people to agree with them and vote with them in order to advance their worldview. So the red team,
Can you explain that?
yeah. So the red team, when you look at the people, the donor class of the red team, like it includes truly ideological but very wealthy people like the Koch brothers who are like libertarians. It includes like the oil and gas industry. It includes a certain segment of the ruling class, right? And the stuff that they believe in is not very popular, right? So, but they still need to win popular elections. They need to get millions of people to vote for them. So,
Meaning the corporations or the rich people who are feeding into it.
Yeah.
They're the ones who need, okay.
yeah. Their main interest with the Republican Party, is a low to no tax regime so that they can get money back on their taxes.
Laissez-faire.
And a low to no state presence in the market, right? They're market capitalists that believe that almost no presence or very limited state presence is ideal,
You mean
right?
regulation, right?
Right, yes, like in terms of regulation, right? And that's basically what they're investing in, and their investment pays off. So like the Trump tax cut, right? Some of these folks invested like tens of millions of dollars. They got that all back in their taxes with the Trump tax cut, right? So it was a good return on their investment. But anyway, it's not popular, and you're not going to inspire millions of people to vote for you if you're like, vote for the Republicans so I can get money back on my taxes. I'm a wealthy person, right? So I'll get you. So what they've done is they've aligned with the right-wing evangelical church and their causes. They've aligned with white identity, and they've aligned with the cultural causes of those various movements in order to inspire millions of people to vote against their economic interests and for the economic interests of a corporate elite, right? So for those people, the Republican Party is the party that defends white Christian values, right? For the people who actually run the Republican Party, it's a party for them to achieve as little regulatory regime as possible and as low a tax burden as possible, right? So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just kind of following along with you and just kind of, so what you're saying is that both parties try to sway corporations because corporations as well as churches to get the vote to get them through.
Yeah.
So it depends on the people, like, it's all about the people, the vote. So if they get the corporations backing and they get the churches backing, then they get all the people pretty much that fall underneath those umbrellas right there.
I would say in some ways the other way around. So the corporations and the very wealthy people, some of which who run corporations, some very wealthy people who are just wealthy by inheritance, who have right-wing political views and are seeking the best economic hand that they could get. They are paying the Republican Party to win elections for them. And so the Republican Party, in order to inspire people to vote with them, align around these ideas, these cultural ideas, these culturally conservative ideas around the white Christian church and white identity, right? Now I'll talk a little bit about the Democratic Party. So the Democratic Party also has a set of very wealthy people. They're capitalists and the Republicans capitalists. They agree generally that neoliberal capitalism is like the way to go. Like there's no argument about that. But there's a difference in the capitalists who support the Democrats actually could tolerate more regulation and believe that some degree of state presence in markets is actually good and evens them out, and as long as they're in charge of developing the regulation. So what they're paying for, and it's worthwhile, is to have a front seat in developing the regulation, right? They would not agree that there should be no regulation. They're like, sure, regulation's fine, as long as I control how the state regulates my industry, right? And some degree of tax, of a tax regime is fine, but like they're really debating like, a flat tax idea or more of a limited sort of like income tax, or is the margin 20 or 25? That's what's happening, and it's a real debate between the capitalists and with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. In order for the Democrats to get to 50% plus one, they rely on messages to inspire a very broad, very diverse grouping of people that the Democrats represent your identity, right? So,
Yeah, we call that neoliberal multiculturalism.
yeah.
So because, like you said, the neoliberal multiculturalists, they've made a cost-benefit analysis through which multiculturalism is good for their bottom line. And it gets black execs, it gets women in execs, but at the end of the day, it's still about the bottom line.
Yep.
So.
And the other thing I want to say is that many of the capitalists that support the Democratic Party are actually socially liberal individuals, right? So they see the stuff that the Republican Party is pushing, and they're like, I don't like that. I like living in a multicultural community. I like being able. I like the fact that I like the fact that I can send my kid to daycare and there's a few Asian kids and some black kids there, and like I listen to Jay-Z, and I do think that trans people should be able to use the bathroom. So like many of these folks tend to be socially liberal, but the thing there is that the decoupling of social rights with economic rights, right, is kind of what Mike, you're talking about, the decoupling of social rights with economic rights, and giving various communities concessions around social rights, but then withholding the economic rights is kind of the thing that the Democratic Party does really well, right? And so, for example, yeah, sure, trans bathrooms, great, but I'm not gonna actually have an intersectional analysis of who this trans individual is, or the fact that like transgender young people of color tend to be homeless at an alarming rate, and I'm not going to care about their well-being and whether or not they have a thriving or living wage or whatever, but like I'm going to give you your bathrooms, or so it's like by decoupling social rights and economic rights, the Democratic Party has been able to provide concessions to its base to keep its base happy enough to vote with them, but still dissatisfied in very, very fundamental ways.
So I need a definition, and you and I have talked about this before, but I cannot hold the definition for neoliberal. And I'm
Yeah.
sorry if that sounds really obtuse, but it's a concept I have a very hard time understanding.
Yeah, okay.
Because it sounds like liberal.
It sounds like liberal,
All
but
right. So here's the deal, right? First off, most people that we slander with liberal ideology, label liberal, pretty much over the last 30, 40 years has been a term. Before that, most people probably would identify as something like progressive, right? So that's a social ideology. The actual idea of liberalism is an 18th century ideology through which sort of you believe that individual freedom is sort of a capitalist individual freedom, right? So you believe in freedom of the individual to engage in the capitalist system. This is sort of Adam Smith, right?
Wealth of Nations.
Wealth of Nations. Fast forward about 150 years to the early 1900s, then you get a shift, right? For the first time in the 1930s, big political parties are caring once again about diversity and about sort of employment of the masses, right? That gives us a period in which a guy named David Harvey calls embedded liberal policy, or some people call Keynesian economics, right? That idea, that becomes the Democratic Party ideology. That's the ideology of everything from the Great Depression, New Deal, to Lyndon Johnson Great Society programs. That becomes our idea of what liberalism is what Keynesian economics, mass employment, and some variant of civil rights, what people call racialism. But neoliberalism itself really is means a return to the ideas of Adam Smith, right? But in this new neoliberal ideology, the corporations are individuals as well, right? And so it's a return to it's a return to the 18th century ideology of what liberalism is. It's not like a new version of people from the 60s or something like that. But it's a very European term.
Margaret Thatcher, right?
You know, calling people neoliberals is a very European term because they understand the difference between socialist, liberal, conservative.
So am I wrong in thinking that neoliberalism and multiculturalism, which you just put together as a phrase, is that contradictory?
It's funny.
Neoliberal, multiculturalism?
No, I mean, look at Google, right? I mean, you're talking about it right now. I mean, Google has a Me Too moment, but they don't think they have a Me Too moment because they do Google Doodles.
They do Google what?
Google Doodles. You know what I mean? They don't think they have a race problem at Google because tomorrow Rosa Parks is going to be on Google Doodle probably because it's her birthday. And we'll be like, man, that shit is dope. I went to Google and when Rosa Parks was
They have
there.
a race and a gender problem.
Right.
Yeah. They got race, gender, class, time, everything.
And then-
Intersectional class.
And then Mike,
Can I say something else about that though? I feel like one of the other important differences though is that in both of these models, there's no sense of responsibility for the greater good. So like even in this the neoliberal multiculturalism, it's like, okay, if I've got a sprinkling of black people over here, who cares about the well-being of all black people? That is enough representation that we now have inclusion. And I think that is an incorporation of it, like, you know, I've been thinking about this idea, like all we're trying to do in the community is take whatever the inequality structure is that exists for white people, and that says that's enough choice. Now everybody needs a structure that looks just like that. And that means we have choice in our system. That means we've looked at it, we have to what it looks like. So I feel like that's a fundamental underpinning that you have to replicate that inequality across cultural existences. But part of the challenge with that is ethical behavior and like what's right and what's wrong is guided by individual values. And so, you know, everyone can say I'm an ethical person, and you know, what that means is gonna vary.
Yeah, neoliberalism is Reaganomics. So I think that's the, if you grew up in hip hop community, you said black person Reaganomics, okay. So neoliberalism is Reaganomics, but in the last 15 years or so, it's really taken off as a term in the United States.
and then wouldn't you also say that it's neoliberalism also comes with it a form of logic, right? Like,
Yeah.
it has a logic to it.
Exactly.
And, you know, the fact that we just naturally without really thinking about it, like when we think about school and what the purpose of education is, so much of it has shifted to high stakes testing and our ability to count. Like, oh, great, so you got a 90% on that test, great. So, and this school is better than that school because, versus like, are students actually developing critical thinking or,
I can answer that.
so to me,
Unless they go to city.
the reliance on metrics, right? As a way to value the worthiness of something in society, to me is a byproduct of a neoliberal sort of logic, right? And then, you talked about sort of Keynesian economics. Would you agree that, like, when people talk about a neoliberal,
Or Fordism. In the U.S. they call it Fordism.
okay.
Ford, like Henry Ford.
Have we shifted to like kind of the Chicago school, Milton Friedman sort of conception of economics, which is like when I think of neoliberalism, I think of him, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can I say something real, oh, go ahead, somebody else is saying.
Yeah.
Also, the neoliberalism, because of the time that it came about, it seems more enmeshed with the globalization than traditional liberalism. Right, so because of the era of globalization, and as you put it, the idea is that it's individuals, but now corporations are also individuals, and so it's seen as the freedom of those corporations to cross borders, invade other markets and countries, that sovereignty dissolves
For business.
for business.
But it actually gets harder for people.
Right.
And that's because you need those people there so that the businesses can exploit their labor.
Right, so we need borders to keep the people.
Yeah, so it's like neoliberal corporations need people in Honduras so that I can get a shirt from Walmart for $3. Right? But you don't need people self-determined in Honduras, because then the people, so that's the other reason why, Chomsky says neoliberalism is actually wrong, because it's neither new nor it's liberal, right? It's really an extension of
Colonialism?
of imperialism and colonialism.
It's the new colonialism.
It's the new phase of imperialism and colonialism, but it's not really sustainable because of the fact that, you go over someplace and eventually sort of like the contradiction of capitalism is that you probably going to end up generating some form of middle class. But at the moment that you sort of generate some form of middle class in that country because you brought industrialization to that place, then you pull it out and you end up creating a social movement that's going to now reject it. And you're going all the way around, but it's not really sustainable. I got this sort of cynical theory where I imagine the last place sort of globalization brings factories back to is the United States. But it's at the time in which people are willing to work for anything less than.
Isn't that where we're going?
Precisely. So essentially, that's my theory. The fact the jobs will come back, but they'll come back for the same price people get paid in other places.
This is a great place to start.
Were there other, yes, we're here.
Oh, no, I've been clarified a long time ago.
Okay, great. I'm looking at the time. So, we have 18 minutes. Great, cool. Okay, so, and thank you for that question, because I think that was great. It just happened there. Yeah, so, like I was saying, with the Republicans and the Democrats, so there's a tension. So here's the thing. The reality is, because we have this binary system, and most black folks are not going to vote for the Republicans because it's clearly the white supremacy party. It is. It's the party that has aligned with white supremacy. The Democrats were the party that aligned with white supremacy, and then they switched, and now it's the Republicans. So most black folks are like, nah, I'm not doing that. And so the reason black folks are rational voters, the reason why black folks vote for Democrats is because they're voting for the party that is clearly not the white supremacy party. Not necessarily because Democrats are the Black Liberation Party, right?
Some black people believe more of what Trump says than they do with what the Democrats say. It's just that he's racist, they won't vote for him.
Some people
I check black people every day about immigration policies.
Oh, yeah,
They get a job.
Yeah,
Are you serious?
there's all types of contradictions, like in every community.
Of course,
But-
I know it's because.
Yeah. But the overt white supremacy of the Republicans is so offensive to most black people that it's like a bridge too far, right? Which is what safely keeps black people as Democrats. It's one of the reasons why Democrats take black voters for granted, because they're like, where else are you gonna go? Right? Like, come on, right? Yeah, essentially, right?
The Democrats like the immigration policies of those borders, which goes to neoliberalism you talk to. We don't want children taken away from their parents. We should think they should be in detention centers together. That's what I'm saying.
So that's neoliberal multicultural.
Yes.
And then because basically half of the country has to choose one of these things, right? These tents are really, really big tents, and there's many parties within these parties. So like you have the Steve Bannon party in the Republican Party, which is like the economic nationalist party.
Right.
That they're actually in debate around this economic nationalism. Some of it challenges the traditional sort of free trade philosophy of sort of traditional Republicans. And so those traditional Republicans and the Steve Bannon, Trump folks, that they're like in debate, but still there's value of being together in this big tent. So far the party hasn't ruptured. There hasn't been a rupture in the Republican coalition, and they stay together and they vote together, even though there is debate and difference and disagreement. In the Democratic coalition, we got all types of folks with all types of political persuasion. There's people who are radicals who ultimately like still go to vote and they vote for Democrats, right? And so, right, and like, and often don't talk about it, but do, right? And listen, like, I want to be clear, like, there's a, and I'd love to have this debate, but we don't have time for it, right? In a winner-takes-all, two-party system, I'm not, like, when the choice is Trump and whoever the Democrat's going to be, I'm not voting for that Democrat. I'm an organizer. I'm voting for which terrain of struggle do I want to be on. Do I want to be, because I'm organizing 24/7, 360 days. I'm going to be organizing before the election, during the election, and after the election. Is it more advantageous for my long-term political position and for my community to organize under a Trump presidency, which is what we know it would be, or some run-of-the-mill Democratic neoliberal president, right? That's what I'm debating, and I think it's a legitimate thing to decide what you want to do. But what you're not saying is, to me, when I vote, I'm not saying, I like this person, I believe in them. I'm placing my political faith in them. But yeah.
Yeah, you talked about contradictions and how to resolve contradictions. I think that what you're saying goes back to that.
Yeah.
So I remember 2016, some people feeling, you know, Trump is going to raise contradictions through which now revolution is going to happen. People have been saying that for 100 years, and that's not how revolution almost has ever happened.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, like, listen,
like making things worse for the people who are suffering.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem to have.
Yeah, I voted for Hillary, right? There's nothing about Hillary's politics I believe in or would advocate. But I didn't vote for Hillary because I believed in Hillary. I was voting for the terrain of struggle that I wanted to be on. That's the only thing I was doing. And I think because we have this personality-based culture of politics, we're not able to actually think critically about the choices we're making politically. It's like, oh, so you love Hillary? It's like, no, I don't love any of these people, right? I voted for Obama, and I have serious critiques of Obama even now.
There's some value though to the current state, just in the sense that there are a lot of things that we like to pretend are okay.
Yep.
That we're not in a position to be able to pretend are okay.
Yep.
Which in some ways motivates people who usually do nothing to get up and do something.
Sure. I mean, I think with every decision, and this is like a philosophical thing, it's true in life, every decision there's upsides and downsides. And I think in general, whenever you're making a decision, whenever you're making a hard decision, figure out what is the upside, what is the downside, how do I mitigate the downside, how do I maximize the upside, and who is experiencing the downside and who is experiencing the upside. I think, especially with our political decisions, we always have to ask ourselves those questions. I think, like, when we delude ourselves into thinking that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, then we obscure the downsides of our decisions, and there are always downsides, and we obscure the collateral of our decisions, and we're not sober-minded about the decisions that we make. And so there'll always be a downside, but there's work to do to mitigate it. There'll always be an upside, there's work to do to maximize it. And it's important to think, when we're thinking about our race, class, and gender analysis, who is experiencing the downside when I make this decision? And so the reason why, well, yeah, I definitely felt like, oh, there's upsides to organizing with Trump. I thought, yeah, there's upsides because he's gonna be a shit show. But when I thought about the downside, I was like, the people who will suffer the downsides, right, are working and poor people, and I'm not willing to make a decision that will create the harm will be working and poor people. So that's, so I think we always need to engage in those calculations, I know we have a few minutes left.
Can you make sure that you talk a little bit about, and you did in the beginning, but about, kind of, what do you mean by crashing the party?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, that's like part 2. So we have 10
And I
minutes.
know some people have come from far, so normally I'm like 8 o'clock, that's it.
Okay,
If you have time and other people feel like hanging around
Yes.
also, because some people have come from a long way.
sure.
So I don't, normally I'm like 8 o'clock,
He said some people.
see you everybody.
Tell us about the bachelor party.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I do have a theory on this. So basically, we have these two parties. Within these two parties are huge coalitions, are people with divergent opinions. And I do think there'll be a point of rupture. There's a left flank of the Democratic Party, right? And you know, it's a bunch of folks. There's the left flank of Labor, so, like the DSA folks, the Democratic Socialists of America, some of the people, the Bernie people, like that's the left flank of the Democratic Party, right? They are in the Democratic Party, and whenever you're in a coalition, I believe in coalitions, I believe in united fronts. You might be in a united front with people genuinely united fronts, you disagree with people in them, right? But you do it because you recognize that you need enough power in order to advance your political position. A lot of times people, like, when you're not clear about that, you're like, well, why am I in coalition with these people? I disagree with them. That's the point of united front, right? But one of the critical questions you need to answer if you're in a united front formation is who's in power, right? And in the let's just call it the Democratic United Front, the people who are in power are the neoliberal forces, right? And so what ends up happening is when the left forces within the Democratic Party recruit people and win elections, they're winning elections in order to advance the power of the people in power in the United Front, which is like, you know, and so it's like, oh, all of these folks, including people on the left, including like, there are some socialists now in Congress and other people, they helped flip Congress so that Nancy Pelosi could be the leader, right? And so that's one of the contradictions of being in a united front when the people who are actually in power in the united front aren't the left forces. Like I'm all for folks on the left developing a united front with whoever, liberals, whoever, whatever, but making sure that like the leadership actually is moving that united front to the left. So
Their problem is they try to, that's why the $1 Million March, I like the women, the 4 women who are really leading the charge. But when I go to the $1 Million Women March, those women, their issues, all they care about is saying, Layla, be a woman, and then do our liberal issues, and you guys are still criminals, and you're still there. It's still like, what?
So, okay, so I want to say 2 things about that. So I want to say 2 things about that.
And they want to tell you who your friends can be.
Right. So 2 things. So 2 things I want to say about that. Then I want to get to the crashing the party part, right? So I think if we're interested in making sure that our politics are not niche and that our politics are popular, right? One of the things we have to decide we want to do or not is if we want to, like, there's different spaces, right? So if you're building cadre, small number of people, right? Pretty high bar of entry, and it's not very volatile. There's a lot of things that everybody agrees with, right? That's if you're building cadre. If you're building mass movement, low bar of entry, very volatile, all types of people, including white ladies with pink hats. Right. But yeah, absolutely. But if you're building mass movement, then you're building a movement, low bar of entry, people just come in, and we should anticipate that if you're just coming in, you're coming in with all of the embedded values and the neoliberal logic and the white supremacy and the homophobia and patriarchy that is embedded in our culture. We should anticipate that when folks come out of wherever and come in here, that when they open their mouths and express themselves, that's where they'll show up. And the analogy I like to use is like, if anybody's done martial arts, if you go to a martial arts class and somebody comes in for their first class and they spar, Nobody's like, why are you kicking like that? Right? People anticipate that people do not know the forms, right? And if you're like a very, very seasoned student, when you spar with somebody like that, you're not like throwing blows, you're like sparring so that they could learn. And so, like, good mass organizing spaces create low bars of entry so people who don't have like a solid political framework could develop it over time and be corrected, checked, be corrected in a way that brings them in, but doesn't isolate them, right? So.
Yeah, one way it was told to me by one of my mentors is sometimes we assume ideological parity as an entry to social movement as opposed to the end, right? Clearly there's certain beginnings where like, you know, physical safety, non-insult, things like that. But I mean, for people to essentially not have any of their contradictions, I think sort of that in itself is a neoliberal aspect that's moved into radical space.
Yeah, and then also there's no such thing as a contradiction with struggle, especially under the greatest contradiction of all, capitalism, right? It's just like, that is just the nature, that's what we're swimming in. So let me get to crash the party now. Like I said before, there's left forces, but there isn't left leadership in the Democratic Party. So the left forces in this country need to develop independent left political power, independent left electoral infrastructure outside of the Democratic Party, right? And the way that we do it is by building our own party. And when I say that, I want to explain what I mean, right? Not by hitting ourselves over the head, not by hitting our heads against the wall and trying to believe that we're Ross Perot when we don't have billions of dollars, be like, oh, we're going to set up our third. It's not going to work, right? So we can't be delusional about the power and resources and capacities that we have. A party is an ideology, a platform, individuals that engage in electoral work, right? Those four things constitute a party. And when you have those four things, when individuals are freely assembling to do that, you are a party because you assert that you're a party, right? You are because you assert it, not because you have a ballot line or because of anything else. Then you engage in tactics that allow your party to advance. So the thing that makes a lot of sense in most places would be that once we form our party, let's name our party. What's the name of our party? Okay, the Black Liberation Movement Party. Okay, so we're the Black Liberation Movement Party, right? Our headquarters is here on Imperial. We got people who are freely assembling, right? So we got one aspect. So let's just say we'll create an ideology which would be like a visionary Black liberation socialist ideology, right? And our platform will be like free land and free food for the people, let's just say, right? Cool, right? And the last thing is the electoral work, right? Now, we have a two-party system, and in California, we also have a one-party system, right? Our electoral work, we're not like, we understand, like, everybody here almost, I think everybody raised their hand when we said, like, the system is rigged, right? So we're not gonna pay too much deference to a rigged system. The way that we'll engage in electoral work is that we'll raise up our folks. We're not Democrats, we're not Republicans, we're Black Liberation Party people, right? We're just gonna cannibalize the Democratic Party's primary system, right? So we'll run our folks as Democrats for city council, but our folks aren't actually Democrats. We're Black Liberation Party folks. We don't have the Democratic Party platform, we have our platform. And we'll hijack the Democratic Party's primary system and win and get into office and then caucus. When we caucus, we're not caucusing with the Democrats, we're caucusing with our folks. There's nothing against the law that prevents us from doing that, right?
You just laid out the plan.
Right? Is that what you were referring to when I walked in and you were talking about changing the system from the inside out? Was that what you were referring to? It sounds very similar.
So it's different, because changing the system from the inside and outside, right? if you were just changing the system from the inside, you'd start off with the premise that we could reform the Democratic Party, right? And we're gonna take over the Democratic Party and reform it and transform it, right? I actually don't think that that is possible, right? Because there's people who spend a lot of money so that the Democratic Party could do the things that they needed to do. They're very invested in that. And I think we could organize in the Democratic Party in order to reform it to a point, and there'll be a point of rupture where the left forces of the Democratic Party will either be neutralized or removed, or those forces might be like, this thing is no longer valuable to us, we're gonna create a new party here and take it. But we're gonna take all the good stuff on the way out, right? What I'm saying is, we'll have our own party, right?
Already set in motion kind of thing?
We'll have our own party. In every single way, we're a party. We just cannibalize the Democrats' primary system to elect our people,
So
right?
occupy the ticket.
Yeah. Because like, we already understand that this system is farcical to begin with, so we're gonna use it against itself in order to align working people's values around elections, right?
Right.
And so that's the strategy that I'm experimenting with the Working Families Party, right?
So instead of making a Democratic club, because that's what people are trying to do now, they make these Democratic clubs that are radical, and then they try to work inside the Democratic Party, they try to flip it, you're saying, no, don't even do that.
Don't even do that. Don't even do it. And here's the thing that's actually great about this strategy. There's a debate. Some people are like, no, I think I could reform the Democratic Party. Some people are like, that's a fool's errand. Both of those people could be part of this party,
That makes sense.
right? And for the people who believe they could reform the Democratic Party, the best way to reform the Democratic Party would be for the Democratic Party to have competition on the line, right? And this is the best strategy to do that. For the people who are like, the Democratic Party doesn't have a chance,
Right.
this is the best way. So this strategy allows for a united front with people who are both agree that the Democratic Party is in decay, but might diverge around whether or not it could be reformed. Both of those people could exist under the Black Liberation Party and win and won elections with one another. And then it's like, let's see what happens. Let's roll the dice.
What is it called?
Working Families
The
Party.
Working Family, I've seen that in New York, on Facebook.
Yeah.
A big presence in New York.
Yes, we are.
The Working Families Party, what is their, how do they look at borders?
Our border strategy or our border.
Like national borders?
So I could tell you, like,
Immigration housing?
I'm
Pretty much.
the director of the party.
The whole party?
Yeah.
Oh, you go.
Yeah.
Hey. That's what's up.
Yeah, but my personal politics don't inform everything about the party. So one of the things that we're doing is we're engaged in a platform creation process over the next year and a half. And one of the things, and it's gonna be popular, so we're gonna engage people all around the country, as well as left organizations and other folks all around the country around what our national platform around borders are. So that's something that we actually want. Part of me coming on is one of the things that I'm focused on is developing a new platform. So that's something that I would love for a lot of people to be involved in. But
I think borders are bullshit, so we don't know what the Democrats, they don't seem like they get that.
Basically, our policies, aren't gonna be, because it's gonna be informed democratically, there'll be some things that I won't be 1,000% aligned with, but I can tell you our border policy certainly will not be a neoliberal policy where money can move freely, but human beings can't. It's not gonna be that. Yep.
Just want to make a quick little metaphor. This might help, might not. Just because we're here in San Diego right now in this moment in time.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm thinking about as we're talking about this, I never thought about this way before, and I think it's really kind of a liberating way of looking at it, to say like, okay, we've had these camps, the red team, the blue team, they've been there for hundreds of years or whatever, and we can just basically make that system less relevant.
Yep.
We have a new definition of a party, and it doesn't actually care about those rules at all. And that the metaphor I want to make is that right now we're on the border, and there's supposed to be governments that take care of people on both sides of this border, but right now there aren't. Neither of them are. And so there are people taking that upon themselves to make a new thing that's neither on one side of the border or the other.
Yeah.
They're not prepared to care for people.
Totally,
It's
totally.
called a vanguard.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
called a vanguard party, and it's called dual and contending power, right? Essentially, sort of, if you don't like the leadership, you rise up and sort of show the people that you have the leadership. So without getting too political, there was a group of people who essentially, the translation of their political party was that they were the majority, but they actually began as a minority, but they used these methods to, 100 years ago, take a majority power. And we remember them as the majority now, but the group that they defeated essentially were the majority at first, right? But I think the thing that you also talk about is that, like, we like to remember a lot of this change happening at times in which things were actually the worst. Oftentimes what happens is those social movements rise up when things are bad, but then the people in power start conceding to the resistance movement, the progressive resistance movement, as to hope to buy you out.
That's
Right.
right. That's right.
Now, this is one reason why people don't like the Democrats, because they say the Democrats is the graveyard of social movements.
Yeah.
But the whole deal then is sort of in your social movement, building in discipline. A discipline to understand that the concessions that they're giving you is a recognition of your power,
That's
and
right.
you need to stay on the course.
That's absolutely right. Yeah.
Right? So that's.
So one thing, I know we're running out of time. If you want to stay in conversation with the Working Families Party, and I've been talking to folks in California about moving west, so hopefully within a year, we're gonna have a presence in California. But you could text us and I'll give you the number. So the number to text is, you wanna pull out your phone right now, you can do that?
This is the time to do that.
Yeah. So the number to text is, and maybe I could put this up, let me try to put this up. The number to text is 738-674. So text the number 738-674, and all you need to text to that number is the letters WFP for Working Families Party. And then if you do that, and then it might ask some questions like, hey, what's your name or whatever, then we can stay in contact. It'll probably ask your zip code.
So reply with your zip code.
Yeah.
What is it, 786?
738-674. And then once it knows your zip code, it'll reach out to you around California specific things.
Then it asks for your name and your email,
Yep.
and then you're done.
And then you're done. Yeah. And so that's the way that we could be in conversation to talk about these strategies and figure out if these strategies make sense for San Diego or other places in California. So the number is text 738-674 and text the letters WFP.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, thank you.